What issue was raised by the daughters of Zelophehad? This is the question that we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of Numbers on Walking Through the Bible.
His word, the glory of his cross.
If you have a Bible with you, turn to Numbers chapter 27. We're going to be reading from verses 1 to 11. If you don't have a Bible, don't worry. Just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So, Numbers chapter 27, beginning at verse 1. Then came the daughters of Zelophehad, the son of Hepher, the son of Gilead, the son of Machir, the son of Manasseh, from the families of Manasseh, the son of Joseph. And these were the names of his daughters, Mahlah, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah. And they stood before Moses, before Eleazar the priest, and before the leaders and all the congregation, by the doorway of the tabernacle of meetings, saying, Our father died in the wilderness, but he was not in the company of those who gathered together against the Lord, in company with Korah, but he died in his own sin, and he had no sons. Why should the name of our father be removed from among his family because he had no son? Give us a possession among our father's brothers. So Moses brought their case before the Lord. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, The daughters of Zelophehad speak what is right. You shall surely give them a possession of inheritance among their father's brothers, and cause the inheritance of their father to pass to them. And you shall speak to the children of Israel, saying, If a man dies and has no son, then you shall cause his inheritance to pass to his daughter. If he has no daughter, then you shall give his inheritance to his brothers. If he has no brothers, then you shall give his inheritance to his father's brothers. And if his father has no brothers, then you shall give his inheritance to the relative closest to him in his family, and he shall possess it. And it shall be to the children of Israel a statute of judgment, just as the Lord commanded Moses. In our last chapter, we finished discussing the second census of Israel and how Israel was to divide their land based on that census. From that census, we found that the population of Israel had stagnated during the 40 years of wilderness wandering, decreasing slightly from the numbers that left Egypt. This makes sense because the Israelites were being punished by God for their rebellion, as well as a reading of several instances during this period where God struck down numbers of people for their sins. Think of Korah and his rebels. Chronologically, we're not that far from the death of Moses and the attack on Jericho, although we won't see these events until our studies of Deuteronomy and Joshua. Here in chapter 27, though, another issue is raised, one of inheritance. Astute listeners of this podcast would realize that in our studies of the Old Testament, when it comes to inheritance, we don't read of women inheriting from their fathers. We do not read of Sarah inheriting anything from her father. We do not read of Dinah inheriting anything from her father. We don't read of Miriam inheriting anything from her father. Non-believers often charge the Bible with misogyny in this regard, but note that it was not God who commanded that daughters not inherit. It was the peoples of that time who decided this. The Bible is merely reporting the facts. In actuality, when the issue of the inheritance of daughters comes up, God rectified the situation fairly. Before getting to the problem and the solution, let's ask ourselves a question. Why is it likely that daughters generally did not inherit from their fathers in this time? It is because women at that time generally got married, most times at a young age, and therefore would be well taken care of by their husbands and their husband's inheritance. And when a woman's husband died, it was expected that either her children or her husband's family take care of her in her older age. Therefore, since the daughters would be well taken care of, inheritance generally went to their living sons so that they could make a livelihood and be able to take care of their own wives. So even though some older societies may have viewed women differently than we do today, there were reasons behind their thinking, and it was certainly not God's command that women never be able to inherit. The situation presented here in Numbers 27, though, is unique, in that a man named Zelophehad died, leaving behind only daughters. Now, this happens all the time today, but let's remember, most people had many more children at that time, so it was far less likely for a man to die without having any sons. In this specific situation, though, with the land of Israel being divided out by tribe and by household, which meant, of course, males in the household, it would mean that the house of Zelophehad would receive no land as an inheritance. Why would this present a problem to these women? Because at least at this time, and implied in chapter 26, these 5 daughters of Zelophehad were not married, meaning that getting no land would result in them being destitute. Zelophehad had died in the wilderness due to Israel's earlier rebellion, but was not involved in the rebellion of Korah. So how is it fair that Zelophehad's house go extinct and they left poor simply because their father had no sons? What they wanted was what would have been their father's inheritance be divided among them. Now, had this been a completely misogynistic society, or had God been misogynistic, Moses simply would have summarily dismissed this case out of hand, but he didn't do that. He took the issue to God, and God told Moses that these women were right. They should receive the inheritance of their father. But God not only dealt with this specific situation, he also laid down a general rule for the future too. If a man died having only daughters, then his daughters would inherit whatever was in their father's possession to give. If he had no children at all, then the inheritance would pass to the man's brothers. If he had no brothers, then the man's inheritance would pass to his father's brothers. And if the man's father had no brothers, then the inheritance would pass to the man's closest relative. In doing this, God ensured that there would not be needless fights over land and inheritance, but that each person of a man's household would receive what was truly theirs. Now, there will be more issues that need to be dealt with concerning this law, but we'll deal with that when we come to it later on in Numbers. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of Numbers chapter 27, verses 12 to 23, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time.
Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends, so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.